Hi, it's Leslie Veronica, and what I want to talk about now is Unionist opposition to Home Rule. Unionists opposed Home Rule for a variety of reasons, and all of this is noted in your notes. And certainly, if you go to CCEA's e-guide, there's a nice little section in there as well. But broadly speaking, these reasons encompass economic, political, cultural, and religious reasons. Catchy slogans such as Home Rule is Rome Rule summarise one aspect, and the aspect that maybe appeals a lot to the grassroots. And certainly, Ulster Unionism, very dominated as it is by the business class, encompasses another end of that, which is the fear that the Belfast business class will be adversely affected by punitive taxes or taxes designed to support rural Ireland, and that will come at the cost of the industrial hub centred in and around Belfast. So there's a wide range of issues really coming into play there. The Irish Unionist Party is led by Edward Carson since 1910. Now, Edward Carson is, of course, himself a Southern Unionist, having been one of the MPs for Trinity College for a number of years. He, however, identified, as indeed did Bonner Law, as we've talked about earlier in the previous video, that Ulster resistance was the most likely way to defeat Home Rule. And his aim is to defeat Home Rule for all of Ireland. It's not just to achieve partition. However, he sees this as a good strategy to do that, and therefore embraces that very early on. He was prepared, as was Bonner Law, to exploit the populism of unionism in Ulster to the fullest. And he was very much enabled in this by the organisational skill of James Craig. And James Craig often doesn't get proper credit, I think, for the degree to which he is the organising force behind many of the most successful events of the Ulster Resistance Campaign, and we'll try to make that good a bit here. So Craig was based in Ulster. He is from a business background. He's a member of the Orange Order. He's much, much closer to grassroots unionism than Edward Carson would be. And he's really the force, as I say, behind many of these very successful, high profile, well organised, often even theatrical events which characterised Ulster resistance in the period 1912 to 1914. Carson had the legal flair, had the intellect, had the rhetoric, could make rousing, insightful, prescient speeches. But Craig is working tirelessly in the background, setting everything up for Carson then to come on stage and be the leading light. So the two together really do make up the ideal team to lead unionism at this time. The methods they use, I mean, from the very start, the Conservatives under Bonner Law had really identified that they would work closely with Irish Unionists to try to defeat Home Rule. And Law was using very extreme language, even in his parliamentary responses to Home Rule from the very start. So the language from the very start goes right to the edge. Very, very harsh language, very threatening language that is used by both Bonner Law and then later on by Carson and other unionists from the start. Threats of violence were never far away, they were never heavily hidden. And indeed, from the start, a lot of the things that are said could be seen as treasonous or threatening rebellion, and in a very open way. With this support, Unionists organised a wide ranging Ulster resistance campaign. So the support is very much there from the British Conservative Party under Bonner Law, which of course conveys a sort of respectability on these activities, helps to allay some of this criticism that these are treasonous activities, that these activities are seeking to cause damage to the nation. That can be allayed to a degree if you've got the support of this big traditionalist party in the UK, which of course they do. So the resistance campaign itself really kicks off in 1911, which of course is before the Third Home Rule Bill had been formally announced in 1912. And this is the Craigavon demonstration, which was attended by about 50,000. It's really where James Craig sets the stage for Edward Carson as a new leader and brings Edward Carson to deliver one of these rousing speeches at a demonstration in the grounds of his home. It was at this demonstration that Carson first talked about the potential of establishing a provisional government. So essentially, that if Home Rule is brought in, that Ulster will secede from a Home Rule Ireland and set up its own provisional government. Again, very extreme language and very radical, extra-parliamentary tactics. And it's a very successful demonstration. It goes down very well. It gives an opportunity for Edward Carson to really set the tone for what his leadership will be like. And that, as I say, is essentially before the Home Rule Bill has been announced. One of the biggest demonstrations takes place in Easter 1912, and that's at the Balmoral Showgrounds. And this is attended by a much larger crowd, about 100,000 attend this. And Bonner Law is there. And often not reported, there were also a large number of other Conservative MPs who would have stood out. You know, at this time, MPs, particularly Conservative MPs, were still very much silk top hats and morning wear. So, you know, they would have been very, very noticeable there. But they're there, and again, it's a show of strength. It's a show of strength between the Conservative Party and the Unionist opposition. And it has all of the right optics in terms of demonstrating that this is a cross-class movement, the strength of the movement, and again, very, very well organised, very thoroughly organised by James Craig. In July of 1912, Bonner Law and the Conservatives hold a demonstration at Blenheim Palace, Oxford. Now, the sighting of this at Blenheim Palace wasn't accidental. Blenheim Palace is the birthplace of Winston Churchill. If you visit Blenheim Palace, which you can do today, you will be taken to the room where Winston Churchill was born. And Bonner Law chooses Blenheim Palace for a particular reason, and again, it's well thought out. This is smaller demonstrations, by 13,000. However, it is a way of capturing a lot of those British Conservatives and strengthening their resolve. Again, Bonner Law uses language that is reminiscent of the language that Winston Churchill's father, Lord Randolph Churchill, had used in his opposition to the previous Home Rule Bill. Whenever Bonner Law says, I can imagine no length of resistance to which Ulster can go in which I should not be prepared to support them. This is clearly also a snub to Winston Churchill. This is sort of laying out in a very visual way that actually the people who are traitors are Churchill and his ilk, who are now supporting Home Rule, something that his father would never have dreamt of doing. So in this case, Bonner Law is nearly setting himself up as the heir to Randolph Churchill in opposition to his own son, Winston Churchill. September 1912 is one of the, I think, biggest events of Ulster resistance, and certainly one that really captures the imagination, the public spirit, and that's the signing of a Solemn League and Covenant. Now, this is steeped, the covenant itself is steeped in religious language. It also draws on social contract theory. It draws on that idea of, you know, the people are loyal and should be loyal. But if a government acts out against the interests of the people, then in that case, it is beholden on the people to really rise up against that. And this is very significant. This is an elaborate, planned event that takes place all across Ulster and lasts for a week. You know, we think of it as Ulster Day. It happened in one day. It did not happen in one day. It has been going on for a week. There's been talk of it for weeks before that. This is a big event. The fact that the Solemn League and Covenant and then the separate Women's Declaration, and of course it's very notable that the women did have to sign a separate declaration. The Solemn League and Covenant and the Women's Declaration achieve about 471,000 signatures, a significant number of people who come out, who queue up and who want to take part in this event. It puts an end, in a way, and this is September 1912, to this view that Unionist opposition is a minority event. It shows the strength of Unionist opposition and in a flamboyant manner. It's also a very important way of raising morale for Unionists. I mean, one of the things that can be very important if you are leading an extra parliamentary campaign, if you are indulging in some form of direct action, is that you need to give people physical things that they can do to feel like they are actually doing something, that they feel like they're taking political action. And this, of course, gives people something to do. This is followed by a much more sinister turn of events in January 1913, which is the formation of the UVF. And at the time of the formation of the UVF, there were certainly those who were involved with that who saw it as a way of actually getting control of a rising number of vigilante groups and trying to bring some sort of order to that. And the involvement of some senior military personnel who had connections with the British Army, very senior connections with the British Army. It was partly to do with that. It was about instilling some sort of discipline on what could have been unruly, isolated, vigilante-style groups. Later, this group then, in an attempt to arm this group, would also be involved in one of the other most significant events, which of course is the Larne gun ring, which took place in April of 1914, so a year and a bit on. In September 1913, a provisional government is actually planned at a meeting at the Ulster Hall of about 500 Unionists. A provisional government is selected to be led by Edward Carson, and a week later, this was reinforced in a moderately subtle way when Edward Carson at Balmoral Showgrounds was conducting a review of the UVF, so a sort of a walk by of UVF divisions. A flag was unfurled, a new flag, which was a red hand with stars on it to represent each of the counties that would be included in this new planned Ulster state. So there wasn't any specific reference to the provisional government at that demonstration. However, the presence of this flag reinforces the event that had taken place a week earlier. So overall, what can our conclusions be about Ulster resistance? There's no doubt that Unionists fought an effective and relentless propaganda campaign, and it was a very successful propaganda campaign which greatly enhanced their cause. Now, there's a great article in History Ireland written by Michael Foy, who is the head of history at Methodist College Belfast. And it's a really good article about this, about Unionist propaganda in the time of the Ulster Resistance Movement. And it's very readable and well worth a look, so have a look for that. Other historians would point to the importance of Carsonism. Alright, so historians such as Michael Laffan, you might be familiar with if you're following along with the historyhub.ie podcast that he does. Laffan and others would make this argument that actually the lasting legacy, the lasting consequence of Unionist militancy in opposition to Home Rule was to bring the gun back into Irish politics. The formation of the IVF, for example, is one very immediate example of that, but that actually it has a lasting impact and militarises Irish politics in a way that had disappeared for a while with the rise of constitutional nationalism and constitutional politics in general. Finally, although the campaign against Home Rule was also being fought in Parliament, there's very little doubt that it's the extra parliamentary activity which brings about the concessions that Unionists will eventually gain. So direct action rather than parliamentary debate won the day, and this is a lesson that others in Ireland would be aware of. Thank you.